Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. The floral pattern on the porcelain teacup seemed to blur before my eyes. I blinked, bringing the tiny painted roses back into focus, their cheerful pink suddenly at odds with the nervous flutter in my chest. It wasn't every Tuesday afternoon that a woman my age, Eleanor Vance, 53 years a wife, a mother, and now a rather contented potter in my spare moments, received a summons from her husband's boss, especially not a private one. George, my dear, steady George, had come home from work the evening before, his usual tired but amiable self. He dropped his briefcase by the old oak hall stand, kissed my cheek, a comforting ritual of 30 years. And then, just as I was dishing out the chicken casserole, he'd said, "Oh, Eleanor, Mr. Albright's secretary called today. He'd like to see you. Privately." I paused, ladle dripping gravy onto the stovetop. Me? Whatever for? George had shrugged, a gesture I knew meant he was as much in the dark as I was, or at least he wasn't going to speculate. Didn't say, just that Mrs. Pringle would call you to arrange a time. Said it was a personal matter. A personal matter. Those words had been ricocheting around my mind ever since. Mr. Albright, Arthur Albright, head of Albright and Sons, the construction firm where George had poured his life's work as chief accountant. I'd met the man, of course, at countless company dinners and a few stiff Christmas parties over the decades. He was always formidable, not unkind, exactly, but exuding an air of quiet authority, of immense wealth and responsibility. He was older, perhaps in his late 70s, with a reputation for being sharp as a tack and deeply private since his wife, an artist I believe, had passed away some years ago. Why on earth would he want to see me? Eleanor, who mostly concerned herself with the consistency of clay and the blooming of her hydrangeas. My mind naturally had conjured a dozen scenarios, each more unsettling than the last. Was George in some kind of trouble? Had he made some dreadful error at work? But George was meticulous, the most honest man I knew. It couldn't be that. Could it? Then the thoughts veered towards the more outlandish. Was Mr. Albright ill, and George was to be his successor? And he wanted to vet me, the future CEO's wife? Highly unlikely. Albright and Sons had children, though I'd heard they weren't much interested in the family business. Mrs. Pringle, a woman with a voice as crisp and efficient as her name suggested, had called that morning. "Mrs. Vance, Mr. Albright would be pleased if you could join him at his private residence tomorrow at 2. His residence, not the office. The knot in my stomach tightened. His home was a grand old estate on the other side of town, a place whispered about, but rarely seen by an ordinary mortal like myself. So here I was, perched on the edge of my favorite chintz armchair, the tea growing cold, waiting for the grandfather clock in the hall to chime 1:30, my signal to leave. I'd changed my outfit 3 times, finally settling on a sensible navy blue dress, the one I wore for important but not overly formal occasions. I wanted to look respectful, composed, not like a woman whose imagination was currently staging a full-blown drama. The house felt quiet, too quiet. George was at work, blissfully unaware of my internal turmoil, or so I hoped. The children, Sarah and Michael, were long grown and flown, building their own lives. It was just me and the ticking clock and the impending mystery of Mr. Albright's invitation. I smoothed down the fabric of my dress for the 10th time. What could a man like Arthur Albright possibly want with me? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered, like the scent of the lilies on the windowsill that were just starting to wilt. I took a shaky breath. Well, Eleanor, I told myself, there's only one way to find out. The drive to Mr. Albright's estate was, in itself, an experience. His part of town was all sweeping lawns and houses that looked more like small museums than homes. I turned Thornfield Manor, as it was apparently called, into a long, winding driveway shaded by ancient oaks that seemed to whisper secrets. The house itself emerged slowly, a magnificent stone structure, imposing yet undeniably beautiful, with ivy climbing its walls and mullioned windows glinting in the afternoon sun. It felt like stepping into another era. I parked my sensible sedan, a stark contrast to the sleek, dark vehicles I imagined usually graced this drive, and took a moment to compose myself. The air here felt different, cleaner, scented with pine and damp earth. A uniformed man, expressionless and polite, opened the massive front door before I even reached it. "Mrs. Vance, Mr. Albright is expecting you. Please come this way." The interior was as breathtaking as the exterior, not ostentatious, but filled with a quiet elegance. Dark wood paneling, plush oriental rugs that muffled my footsteps, and paintings that looked like they belonged in a gallery. There was a scent of beeswax and old books. It was the kind of quiet that spoke of generations, of history. I was led through a wide hallway, past a sweeping staircase, and towards a pair of tall oak doors. The housekeeper, a stern-looking woman in a gray dress, announced me with a soft, "Mrs. Vance is here, Mr. Albright." The doors were opened, and I stepped into a room that took my breath away. It wasn't a formal sitting room, as I'd expected, but a library, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves crammed with volumes of every imaginable size and binding lined every wall. Two large leather armchairs faced a magnificent stone fireplace, where a low fire crackled merrily, despite the mildness of the May afternoon. And there, standing by the window, looking out over what I presumed were extensive gardens, was Arthur Albright. He turned as I entered, and for a moment, he just looked at me. His eyes, a surprisingly clear blue, were not unkind, but searching. He was frielier than I remembered from the company parties, his tailored suit hanging a little looser on his frame, but his presence still filled the room. "Mrs. Vance, Eleanor, if I may?" His voice was softer than I recalled, a low rumble. "Of course, Mr. Albright." I managed, my voice a little breathier than I would have liked. He gestured towards one of the armchairs. "Please sit. Can I offer you some tea, or perhaps something stronger?" "Tea would be lovely. Thank you," I said, sinking into the surprisingly comfortable leather. It felt like being enveloped. He didn't ring a bell or call for anyone. Instead, he moved to a small, antique sideboard where a silver tea service was already laid out. He poured the tea himself, his movements slow but deliberate, handing me a delicate china cup, the steam fragrant with bergamot. He said, "I appreciate you coming all this way. Eleanor, I know it must have seemed a rather unusual request." I offered a small, hopefully polite, smile. It was a little unexpected, yes. He settled into the armchair opposite me, the fire crackling softly between us. He didn't speak immediately, just sipped his tea, his gaze thoughtful as it rested on me. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, not exactly, but it was laden with anticipation. I could feel my heart thumping a steady rhythm against my ribs. The subtle tension I'd felt all morning was now a palpable presence in this grand, quiet room. He looked less like a formidable tycoon and more like an old man, a thoughtful, perhaps even lonely old man. Finally, he placed his cup on the small table beside him and leaned forward slightly, his blue eyes fixed on mine. "Eleanor," he began, his voice gentle but serious, "I've asked you here because I find myself in a rather peculiar situation, and after a great deal of thought, I believe you might be the only person who can truly help me." My mind raced. Help him? Me? The woman who debated the merits of terracotta versus stoneware pots. What earthly help could I be to Arthur Albright, a man who could likely summon experts from any field with a single phone call? The air in the magnificent library seemed to crackle with unspoken questions. I clutched my teacup a little tighter, waiting. The phrase, "you won't believe what happened," certainly felt like it was about to earn its keep. His next words, however, were not at all what I was bracing myself for. "It concerns my late wife, Amelia," he said softly, his gaze drifting towards the window, a shadow of old grief passing over his features. "And her legacy, Amelia, his wife. I vaguely remembered her from years ago, a graceful, somewhat ethereal woman who always seemed to be observing the world from a slight distance. She had been an artist, a sculptor, if memory served. George had mentioned her passing had hit Mr. Albright very hard, that he'd become even more private afterward. The mention of her name, spoken with such quiet reverence, shifted the atmosphere in the room. The tension of the unknown began to transform into something else, something deeper, more human. "George has spoken of you over the years, Eleanor," Mr. Albright continued, his eyes returning to mine. "He often mentions well, your sensibility, your appreciation for art, for beauty. He once told me about the Community Arts Center you tried to get off the ground years ago, before your children were born." I was taken aback. I hadn't thought of that old dream in decades. A small, ambitious project I'd poured my heart into in my late 20s, a place for local artists to gather, create, and teach. It had ultimately failed due to lack of funding, and, if I was honest with myself, perhaps a lack of sustained, hard-nosed business acumen on my part. Life, marriage, and motherhood had gently steered me onto a different path. How and why would George have mentioned that to his boss? And why would Mr. Albright remember it? He also told me, Mr. Albright said, a faint, almost sad smile touching his lips, that you have a very good heart and a keen eye for detail. Amelia, you see, Amelia left behind a great deal of work. Her sculptures, her sketches, her journals. For years, I haven't been able to face it. It's all been locked away in her studio here at Thornfield. He gestured vaguely towards another part of the large house. But I'm not getting any younger, Eleanor, and I feel an increasing urgency to do right by her memory, by her art. He paused, taking a slow breath. The fire popped, sending a little shower of sparks up the chimney. I found myself leaning forward, my earlier anxieties replaced by a growing sense of empathy and a profound curiosity. "I want to catalog her work," he said, his voice gaining a little more strength. "Perhaps arrange a small, private exhibition, or even donate some pieces to the local museum, the one she always supported. But I cannot do it alone. My children, bless them, have their own lives, their own interests. They love their mother, of course, but they don't understand her world, her passion, in the way I think you might." He looked directly at me, then, his gaze intense, appealing. "What I'm asking, Eleanor, is whether you would consider helping me with this. To go through Amelia's studio, her work, her notes, to help me understand it, organize it, to help me share her gift with the world, in whatever small way we can. It would be a significant undertaking, I know, and perhaps an imposition." I sat there, stunned into silence. This was not a reprimand about George. This was not a business proposition. This was an invitation, an unexpected, deeply personal plea from a grieving husband who wanted to honor his wife's memory. He was asking me to step into a part of his life and hers that had been sealed off for years. He saw something in me, something George had apparently illuminated, that he believed could help him. The potter who fussed over glazes, the woman who tended her hydrangeas, was being asked to curate a legacy. The initial shock began to subside, replaced by a strange mixture of emotions. There was a fluttering of nervousness. Yes, the scale of it, the responsibility. But beneath that, something else was stirring. A flicker of that old excitement, the passion I'd felt for the Arts Center all those years ago, a sense of purpose beyond the comfortable routines of my daily life. It was as if a door to a forgotten room in my own heart was creaking open. "Mr. Albright," I began, my voice a little unsteady. I I don't know what to say. I'm deeply honored that you would even consider me for such a task." He smiled, a genuine, relieved smile this time, and it softened the lines on his face, making him look younger, more approachable. "Please, Eleanor, call me Arthur. And the honor would be all mine. George often said you had a quiet strength, a way of seeing things others missed. Amelia was like that too. I think, I think you would have understood each other." The thought of his late wife, Amelia, filled the room not as a sad memory, but as a gentle presence. I looked around the magnificent library, at the crackling fire, at this man who had built an empire but was now asking for help with something so intimately connected to his heart. My earlier nervousness was still there, a faint tremor, but it was now overlaid with a profound sense of compassion and a dawning realization that this unexpected encounter might be more than just a task. It felt like an opportunity, a connection waiting to be made, a story waiting to be uncovered. I took a deep breath, the scent of old books and wood smoke filling my lungs. "Arthur," I said, testing the name, "I would be privileged to help you. If you truly believe I can." His smile widened, and a light seemed to rekindle in his blue eyes. "Oh, I do, Eleanor. I truly do." He leaned back in his chair, a visible wave of relief washing over him. "Thank you. You have no idea how much this means to me." The tea in my cup was now cold, but I barely noticed. A warmth was spreading through me that had nothing to do with the fireplace. It was the warmth of connection, of a shared, unspoken understanding. The quiet, imposing library no longer felt intimidating, but like a sanctuary, a place where something important was about to begin. I thought of George, and a surge of affection washed over me. My dear, steady George, who, in his quiet way, had somehow paved the path for this extraordinary, unexpected moment. The afternoon was far from over. I sensed, in fact, it felt like something was just beginning. Arthur rose, a little stiffly. "Well, then," he said, his voice brighter now, perhaps you'd like to see Amelia's studio. It's been untouched for a long time, but maybe with you, it's time to let some light in." My heart gave a little leap. Amelia's studio, a place kept sacred, a time capsule of her life, her art. To be invited in was a profound gesture of trust. "I would like that very much, Arthur," I said, my voice clear and steady now. He led me from the library down a quieter, sun-dappled corridor I hadn't noticed before. The house seemed to unfold before me, revealing its more private, lived-in corners. As we walked, he spoke a little more about Amelia, her laughter, her dedication to her work, the way she saw beauty in the most ordinary things. His words painted a picture of a vibrant, loving partnership, and I felt a pang of sadness for his loss, mingled with a growing anticipation for what lay ahead. We stopped before a simple wooden door at the end of the hallway. It was unadorned, unlike the grander doors in the main part of the house. Arthur paused, his hand resting on the cool metal of the doorknob. He looked at me, a silent question in his eyes, perhaps seeking reassurance. I nodded gently. He took a breath, turned the knob, and pushed the door open. A soft gasp escaped my lips. The room was flooded with natural light from a huge, north-facing window that took up almost one entire wall, overlooking a wild, overgrown garden. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams, illuminating a space that was clearly an artist's haven. Canvases, some blank, some bearing the faint charcoal outlines of a preliminary sketch, were stacked against walls. Tools I didn't recognize lay on long wooden workbenches, alongside familiar sculptor's implements, chisels, rasps, calipers. And everywhere, draped in white dust sheets, were the shapes of her work. Some small, some impressively large, their forms hinted at beneath the coverings. The air was still, thick with the scent of dried clay, old turpentine, and something else, a faint, lingering floral perfume. Perhaps it felt like stepping into a photograph, a moment frozen in time. There was a profound sense of the artist herself, as if she had just stepped out for a moment and would return at any second. Arthur didn't speak, just watched my face. I walked slowly into the center of the room, feeling an almost reverent hush fall over me. This wasn't just a room full of objects. It was a testament to a life, a passion, a creative spirit. The responsibility of what I was about to undertake settled upon me, not as a burden, but as a precious charge. It's wonderful, I breathed, turning to him. His eyes were glistening slightly, and he offered a small, tremulous smile. She loved this room, he said, his voice thick with emotion. It was her sanctuary, her world. He gestured around. I haven't touched a thing. I didn't know where to begin. I understood. How could one begin to sort through the fragments of a cherished life, a vibrant talent cut short? My gaze fell upon a particular sheet-draped form, near the window. It was tall, slender, with a graceful curve that spoke of elegance even beneath its covering. I felt an inexplicable pull towards it. May I asked softly, looking at Arthur. He nodded, his expression encouraging. Please, that's why you're here, Eleanor, to help me bring her back into the light. With a sense of gentle anticipation, I reached out and carefully, slowly lifted a corner of the dust sheet. What lay beneath was breathtaking. A sculpture, cast in bronze, of a dancer, mid-pirouette. It was so fluid, so alive, it seemed to defy the solidity of the metal. The detail was exquisite, the emotion captured in the tilt of the head, the arch of the back, the outstretched hand. It was a piece of profound beauty and grace. I felt a lump form in my throat. It wasn't just technically skilled. It had a soul. I could feel Amelia's spirit in it, her passion, her vision. For a long moment, I could only stare, lost in its artistry. Arthur had come to stand beside me. That was one of her last pieces. He said quietly, she called it the ascent. I looked at him and saw not the powerful businessman, but a man sharing his most treasured memories. In that moment, a deep and unexpected emotional connection formed between us, forged in shared admiration for Amelia's gift and in the unspoken understanding of loss and legacy. This was more than just a project. This was a journey into art, into memory, and perhaps into a new chapter of my own life. The initial surprise of his request had given way to a profound sense of purpose. I knew, with a quiet certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this was something I was meant to do. The subtle tension of the unknown had fully transformed into the gentle embrace of a shared, meaningful endeavor. My life, which had felt so comfortably predictable just that morning, suddenly held the promise of something new, something deeply resonant. And it all started because my husband's boss asked to see me privately. You truly wouldn't believe what happened next, or rather, what was beginning to unfold.